Associate Director Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I neglected to recognize the staff that are joining me at the table, so I'll do that briefly. Daniel Del Bianco, although not on staff, has been working with us over the last year and a bit on this matter. Ron Gowland, Manager of Capital Projects, and with respect to the South Arc, Steve Sterling from Facilities Management. And with that, as some brief remarks, I'll turn it immediately over to the Chair of the South Arc, Superintendent Sinzer-Box.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to begin by thanking all members of the South Arc Committee for their dedication and commitment over the past year. It truly has been an incredible journey. As with all of our ARCs, committee members were charged with a very difficult and challenging task that required them to both represent the interests of their local school communities and also adopt a system perspective to consider the best interests of all students in HWDSB. Community participation throughout our time together helped guide the ARC in its decision-making process. All of our public meetings were extremely well attended as the community shared their thoughts and feelings on a number of the proposed options. Community input was also received via email throughout the entire process. Tonight, the following members of the South Arc will be presenting the committee's recommendations. To my right, Gary Duveau, Ann Pollard, and Kevin Robinson. Committee?
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you to the trustees for having us here tonight. We would also like to acknowledge all the dedicated hard work performed by members of the South Arc. It has been an extremely busy and enlightening year. We hope that a positive outcome for students will occur as a result of the work that we've put forward in the South Arc. Tonight we're here to present an overview of what the South Arc's recommendations and additional considerations will be. Over the course of 17 working meetings and 4 public meetings, the South Arc has developed and is recommending 4 possible options for the trustees to consider. In finalizing our options, the South Arc chose not to prioritize our recommendations, but instead to allow each the opportunity to stand on their own merit. We are pleased with the work that we have done over the past year while realizing some of the limitations faced by our ARC, some of which did not allow us to gain traction early on in the process, and others which may have had a direct impact on our final recommendations. However, our job as a committee was to explore all challenges and creatively develop proposed recommendations which best suit the needs of the students in the South Arc. I'm now going to pass it over to Kevin so he can walk you through the 4 options.
Okay, again, the microphone's not here, so I'll do my best to convey our thoughts. One thing Gary didn't bring up, the main issue that brought us to having 4 options instead of being able to finalize one was actually twofold. The first one was that we were very much concerned with what to do with the needs of our students at the Mountain Secondary School, and the second one, similar to the North Arc, was a lack of a suitable, or what we deemed suitable location for a new building that we would like to see happen. Right here is the current situation with the catchment areas of Sherwood. The only thing here, the Sherwood catchment area is here and along here. The rest are fairly obvious. Mountain, once again, is a system school. Westmount we show on the map for reference, but is obviously not in our terms of reference and therefore not mentioned. The current capacity, right now we're dealing again with almost 1,600 surplus spaces, and in 2014-2015 that number rises to over 2,100. So same types of problems that the North Arc is facing. Our recommended options, like I said, there were a lot of different options based on where we would most like to see the building of a new facility. As a committee, as a group, we would like to see that on the southeast side of the mountain, as that is where the majority of the growth is in the South Arc. Right now, the 2 sites that are of suitable size from what we were, the information given to us from senior staff was one on the Sheldon site and one at the Jerome site. The Sheldon site escapes me on the exact location. It was even further west, so we talked about the Jerome site being the most suitable site, the furthest west for us to deal with. Concept B was the closure of Sherwood and Sir Allan McNabb in 2015, and construction of a new secondary school. Mountain would remain open with additional appropriate programs moved to that location. Those programs involve such things as the programs that were currently at the Crestwood location, as well as many others. Concept C was the closure of Hill Park, Mountain, and Sherwood in 2015. Construction of the new secondary school, again located southeast of the link, with a target date of September 2015, and the Mountain program would be relocated into the new facility. There was some debate between all of the members of the committee whether a standalone Mountain program in the existing building was best suited for their needs, or if that was best suited to move the Mountain secondary program into the new building. Without wasting time, Concept D involved the closure of Barton and Sir Allan McNabb. Construction of the new school southeast of the link, and Mountain would remain open, the building, with additional appropriate programs. And Concept E, finally, the closure of Mountain, Sherwood, and McNabb, and the Mountain program relocated to the new school, again with a new school being developed and built in the southeast portion of the link. Now, to further enhance options B, D, and E, and I'll go over that again once I have the maps up, because I think it's a little more relevant to the arguments that the South Arc would like trustees to entertain and engage the Westmount school community about the possibility of relocating the self-paced, self-directed program to Hill Park. The Hill Park site would provide a central location on a major bus hub for the self-paced, self-directed program, while the Westmount site is ideally situated to service the students residing in the West Mountain. One of the major issues that we had was a geographic spreading out of all of the buildings as such. This is option B, so that was going to be the closure of McNabb and Sherwood. Mountain stays as is. Hill Park is here, Barton is here. I believe this, I can't see quite that well, but I believe this is Miles Road here and Rymel. And that was an area you can see generally is centralized. We would love for the new building to be built somewhere on the southeast side of the link. That area would satisfy. That we had no idea as for an exact site. Similar to the North Arc, those issues become difficult based on as soon as properties are identified, those the values of those properties that the board doesn't necessarily own would then be driven up by the owners upon hearing our plan. Option B, again, 1,578 surplus spaces would then be reduced to 465, significant improvement, over 90%. Option C is going to be the existence of McNabb and Barton. The Westmount program, the Mountain program would be relocated along with Hill Park to the new building, preferably on the south side. The Jerome site, Upper Wellington and Stone Church, the Jerome site is right there, and that is the property that the board right now owns. We would like to see a school more centralized to the southeast area of the mountain. As the numbers crank out, we move from 1,578 surplus spaces to 137, which is a dramatic improvement on that. And as that falls out through 2020, we're only at 317. Option D involves the closure of Sir Allan McNabb and Barton. There was a tremendous outcry from the Sherwood population, and this was an option that was added near the end of our process. Hill Park would stay as is, and Mountain would also remain open here. The Hill Park catchment area would be the green area here, again, a new building somewhere southeast, preferably, and Sherwood would remain open there. This leads us with, at 2015, 681 surplus spaces, which would then move out to 861 as the year 2020 came about. And our final proposal was the closure of Mountain, Sherwood, and Sir Allan McNabb, with Hill Park, Barton remaining open, and again, a new school south of the link. So, like I said, a major reason for for the existence of 4 separate options is that the location of what we deem to be the most suitable or most preferred location for a school on the South Mountain was, without that land, it is difficult for us to decide which of the existing schools would be best suited to go up for closure. And the second reason, of course, with a difference of opinion in terms of what would be best for the students involved in the mountain program. The last option, again, is actually an option that sees us go to 60 spots below surplus, so 60 more students than we have spaces, and that option, as it goes out to 2020, going to 120 student placements. This slide here breaks down all of the numbers without going into a ton of detail, because it is very similar to what you just saw with the North Arc. We have, based on some program strategy, that is the only difference. In the first part of the slides, the program strategy, a lot of the time is dealing with the mountain program, the mountain students. Everything else is identical in terms of new school and acquisition of land and everything else. Of course, with the Jerome site already being owned by the board, that land acquisition isn't involved there. As for the options here, everything in red is a cost, everything in black is a potential funding sources from proceeds of disposition of the schools in each option. That obviously, as those change, those numbers are going to vary. And potential funding from the ministry of the $25.5 essentially $1 million for the new building. That brings some different numbers along these lines here, but essentially these are the potential costs to the board, and based on any of the options, these are potential savings to the board by going through any of those South Arc options. As for the legacy costs, again, same, you have the benefit of at least having gone through this with the North Arc already. All of our FCI numbers based on the recap data are all through if the number is there, that means that school in that option would remain open. So we would lose the FCI numbers for Sherwood and McNabb in option B, these Hill Park Mountain and Sherwood in option C, and so forth through here. And on this slide here, the difference versus the current situation. This is the amount of money actually saved by the board using the FCI numbers through each option. So option E being the highest option C being the highest at 53.6, down to option D at 26.3.
Our additional recommendations, please let me know if I'm not speaking loudly enough. The first one, that all schools remain open until the new school is ready for occupancy in 2015. This is a theme that I know you heard through the North Arc, and the staff recommendations echoes the same theme. I just wanted to reiterate that this point was of extreme importance to members of the South Arc. We felt that stability is a very, very large part of student success, and we believe that no student should undergo more than one forced transition to a new school during the course of his or her high school career. So we felt that if the opening of the new school is to be delayed, then the closing of the old schools should also be delayed. Secondly, that any new school will include space for community partnerships where interest and support is evident. And thirdly, that the facilities management department consult with the principal, school councils, and school communities and specialists to ensure that the existing facilities meet the program strategy and address the renewal needs as outlined by the SART committee. This slide was put in from the appendix, and I wanted in particular to draw your attention to it. And this is because one of the huge issues that the South Arc had during the past year was dealing with the ministry formula for how classrooms are staffed. At Mountain School, where you have classrooms of children with high needs, you do not have 21 in a class. And to say that Mountain was only at 38% utilization rate based upon a rate of 21 students per class was absolutely misleading. And we felt very strongly that for people to process and to understand the needs of students who have intellectual needs, social needs, emotional needs, that we had to make it clear we don't put 21 kids in a classroom at Mountain, and we can't. And wherever these children are to be moved, whether they stay at a Mountain facility or whether they move into another school, there has to be an understanding and accommodation of their needs. So I asked staff to please have a look at the numbers if we were to be looking at the utilization rate of Mountain at 12 per classroom, which is a loading for a resource room. So that just showed it. Where's the So what I wanted to show where, first of all, where the ministry puts the utilization rate and say 2010 of Mountain at 34% when you're looking at 21 students per classroom. When you go to 12 students per classroom, it's, can someone read that out loud? 58%. So we really have to look realistically at what this means in terms of loading our classrooms, in terms of student needs, and when we're really talking how empty are our classrooms, it makes a difference. I understand for trustees, one has to take on the ministry and take on their ways of making formulas, but we're talking about people, we're talking about students, and we're talking about the real and actual needs. So it makes a huge difference. Are we really saying that Mountain has 525, room for 525 students, or are we really saying that it actually has room for 309 students? How empty is Mountain? How full is Mountain? What are the students' real needs, whether they're in Mountain or whether it's transferred to another site? So please, I'd like to ask the trustees to keep that in mind as they're looking at new accommodations for the Mountain students. So as you've noticed, we have 2 recommendations that keep the Mountain program as a standalone program. And we have 2 recommendations that move the Mountain secondary school program to the new school. There are pros and cons to both of these. I mean, one of the reasons why we didn't come up with one recommendation is that we weren't able to say that either of those choices was the perfect choice for our kids. I will not try to go over every single one of those pros and cons, but I do want to draw your attention to some of them, which I don't have on the slide for you, but which I'll read up here for you. Keeping Mountain Secondary School program as a standalone program, some of the pros for that is that there's little disruption to students who often have difficulty with change. Our kids need stability more so than the average student. That would also give the students a fair chance to have leadership roles within their school. At Mountain, we have such an amazingly strong student council. They've just blown me away with their leadership skills. Would they, if they were integrated into a practice school, have the opportunity to be student leaders like that? Possibly not, and that's really something that we have to think about before we take that option away from our kids. Students have a feeling of belonging without the typical judgments often found in traditional high schools. They all know that they all have some sort of special need going on, and they tend to accept one another. That's a magical element to bring to children. A smaller size of school can bring a greater sense of community. Our children, and many of them come from families which have suffered disruption, they need community. Many of our students said to us, Mountain School is like a family to us, and they need that in their lives. Small population allows for better fulfillment of social emotional needs of students. Again, they leave the family, and staff becomes their family. When students are ready to transition to the new school, they have the opportunity to have a fresh start without the stigma of coming from the wing section of the school. And I know that word was used earlier. It's one that we want to be very careful of, because again, we are looking for our children not to be stigmatized by being in the wing. Again, this standalone idea has its cons. Most students have to be bused to Mountain right now, and they do not have the benefit of attending a local school. Also, program choice is limited in a small school, and we recognize that that is a con. Very briefly, some of the pros of moving the Mountain Secondary School program to the new school. Working with a greater enrollment, so the Mountain program plus the composite program within the school could make the availability of funds greater and allow for a wider variety of programs to be offered. The opportunity for students to be integrated in some classes. Absolutely phenomenal thing that we would like our children to have the opportunity for if and when they are ready for it. The new school has the potential to create an environment which promotes pro-social behavior with people of different ability altogether, having regular interactions with peers in preparation for life after school. Students could be in a more diverse and potentially challenging environment with greater opportunity to grow and learn and to be challenged. Access to most current technology would be a wonderful thing. Again, the cons for our students and ones that we have to keep very much in mind, potential of being bullied. Our students have experienced bullying for years. When they're in the elementary system, they often come to Mountain and they're free of that kind of pressure from the other kids. So we have to be very careful of that. And of course, along with that comes the exclusion by peers. So again, I would ask the trustees to really, really educate themselves about the pros and cons of the of either method when thinking about accommodation for our children. Mountain Secondary School. Again, you heard this through the North Arc. So we are asking that in options which propose the closure of Mountain Secondary School, the South Arc is recommending that the board create a committee post-ARC comprised of school council members, students, parents, staff, and community members to inform the direction around the transition, the programs, the facilities, and supports necessary for the success of our students. I want to say a few more words about that. And that would like to recommend that the board be very, very proactive and assertive and inclusive in its efforts to bring in the Mountain parents for consultation. This is not a scientific number, but certainly from what I have learned from staff and administration at Mountain, that a very, very high number of our students come from families that also have special needs. To get these parents to come to meetings is a very hard thing to do. We have to be able to accommodate them in many, many ways if you really want to find out what they have to say, and they are the ones who know their children the best. So in order to do this, we have to highly encourage Mountain parents to participate, and we have to assure them that their input is important. The kind of support that they will need might include bus fare, offering childcare, even supper, the way supper was provided for members of the ARCs. As well, it might mean ensuring a non-threatening environment in which people from various educational backgrounds and with a wealth of different experiences can feel comfortable to share their needs, their opinions, their hopes, and their ideas for improving their children's education. I think our board has the potential to do that outreach and to be inclusive, but it takes effort on the part of the board to do that. Thank you.
Okay, under the program recommendations, the South Arc is requesting that there be an equitable distribution of programs of choice throughout the cluster. These would include, for example, athletic programs, health and wellness programs, and high school major programs. We are also requesting that a secondary school French immersion program be included in the South Cluster, hopefully in some type of a central location if possible. We are also looking at having some type of appropriate Tier 2 and 3 intervention program included in the cluster to help serve students who require them. The South Arc also believes that the board should be responsible for students requiring transportation to participate in programs that they may happen to choose, so programs of choice. To further enhance options B, D, and E, the South Arc would also like to request that trustees engage the Westmount school community in regard to relocating the self-paced, self-directed program currently at Westmount to the Hill Park School. The Hill Park site would provide a more central location for this type of program, while the Westmount site itself is ideally suited for students on the west part of the mountain. And finally, the South Arc has recommended that a new school be constructed in the southeast portion of the mountain south of the link. Although it is also realized by the South Arc that the board does not currently own any type of suitable property in this particular location, they strongly feel that this would best suit the needs of the broader community and broader population of that area. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll go to Associate Director Bain for the staff recommendations.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to bring forward the final staff recommendations, which includes the closure of Mountain Secondary School in June of 2015 and relocation of those students as a whole to Hill Park Secondary. The closure of Sherwood Secondary School in June 2015 and the relocation of those students to Barton and to Hill Park, and that will require us to enter into a boundary study, and we're recommending that be completed prior to June of 2014. And finally, the closure of Hill Park in July of 2015, pending, once again, funding and pending the approval from the Ministry of Education for the construction of the new school with a target opening date of September 2015. And just to perhaps review my response to Trustee Mulholland with respect to the north, similarly here in the south, if we are not able to entertain the funding and secure approval from the ministry, the first two staff recommendations would prevail, and we would see the closure of Mountain Secondary School and Sherwood Secondary School by June 2015. I also want to flag for excuse me, trustees, that while the Jerome site is an ideal site for that school south of the link, it's ideal because of its size, its location, and the fact that we are the owners of that property. However, depending on the growth in that area of the mountain, there may be a more suitable site, although one has not been identified to date, further south of the Jerome site. But once again, that would only be in the case in which the population increased even further south. With respect to the terms of reference and under the heading of accommodation, I think it's important to note that the staff recommendation brings us to a utilization rate of 96% in 2015, and that declines to 91% by 2020. The number of surplus pupil spaces decreases dramatically from 2,300 to 318 by 2020. And under the status quo option, which is the leaving everything as it is, the utilization rate would be projected to decrease to 57% by 2020. So our approach to getting it to 91% in 2020 certainly has a great deal of appeal for the staff. With respect to facility condition, the closure of those three schools eliminates approximately $54 million in deferred capital maintenance. And once again, this is a recommendation to construct approximately a 1,000 pupil place secondary school. And that number could be a little bit higher, and it all depends on the eventual enrollment that would feed into that secondary school. The program slides are essentially a repeat of the slides that we presented with respect to the North Arc. They also reflect very significantly the comments that the director made to preface the evening. And we have, we share the interest of the members of the South Arc when they talk about, and we want to ensure a safe and inclusive learning environment with the appropriate supports for the students from Mountain. And once again, as I stated with the Parkview review, we started off our thinking that the Mountain students would return to their home school. But once again, we were listening to the community over the last year, and we have once again decided that they should move en masse to, in this case, Hill Park. And we believe we can provide them with a safe and inclusive, well-supported and resourced program at the Hill Park location or the new school, subject to the funding and the approvals. Once again, the slide that we saw with respect to the north, and we certainly are supportive of the notion of a transition committee to reach out to the parents and guardians and staff, students, and community members in order to ensure as smooth the transition as possible for the students from Mountain. And as I said a moment ago, we share the interest and the commitment to a safe and inclusive learning environment for those students. Transportation, you'll see the impact on transportation with the current situation having 74% presently walking, 26 eligible for transportation, and it would result in 76% walking and 24% eligible for transportation. Funding. The cost of our final staff recommendation is $31.9 million, and we would see the funding strategy to be supported with $13.5 million from the disposition of the Hill Park, Mountain, and Sherwood sites, and we would require a business case submission to the ministry totaling almost $25.5 million. Implementation, a change from our original implementation timelines, and the closure of Mountain and Sherwood in June of 2015, the closure of Hill Park in July. Once again, that's just staged for operations benefit. And certainly it would be, the closure of Hill Park, as I said, is contingent on the opening of a new school in September of 2015. Once again, we commend the committee members and the staff for their dedication to this project. We're supportive of option C that the South Arc has submitted to you this evening, which is the closure of Hill Park, Mountain, and Sherwood, the construction of a new secondary school south of the link. And we believe that option C from the South Arc, with which we concur, would best serve the short and longer term needs of the community and the board as a whole. And Mr. Chair, that ends the presentation of the staff report, and we'll be pleased to respond to trustee questions for clarification.
Thank you, Associate Director, and thank you also to Kevin, Ann, and Gary for your presentation, and all the folks at the South Arc for the many, many hours of thought and debate, for sure. So, going to questions for clarification, I see Trustee Hicks first.
First of all, I'd like to thank the committee for all the hours that they put in, from the students on the mountain and the parents in the community. You've done just a great job. I attended all the meetings but one, so I'm really aware of the package and what's here, so I will save my questions maybe to the end and let other trustees ask the questions that are not so familiar with the process. I have one question through the chair, and that is, there were some questions when we went into the small groups about rec centers, and I'm not quite sure where we ended up with the rec centers as far as the city is concerned. Do you recall any comments that the counselors made on the rec centers if certain schools were to close? And the reason for the question is I received emails and questions and concerns in the community about the pools. So through you to the committee, was there any feedback from the counselors on the rec centers?
To the best of my knowledge, I believe that the answer we got back is that was obviously a major issue with two of the schools of the 4 composite schools having rec centers attached, was that a rec center would have no problem remaining open. It would still be operational and functional, even in the event that a school would be to close, be it Hill Park or Westmount. I mean McNabb, being the two schools with rec centers attached.
Through the chair, that was my understanding, and I had conversations with the counselor on this issue, and I really believe that the community can be at rest for those pools. Regardless of which way we go and what schools, those pools will be there for the communities on the mountain. And again, thanks very much for all the hard work that you've done.
Thank you, Trustee Hicks. Trustee White's next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I attended some of the early meetings of South Arc. I didn't attend some of the last ones, final meetings. So I have a couple quick questions. Concept E is interesting. Actually, several of them are very interesting. So I do like the fact that 4 options were laid out. 3 of the options suggest moving the Westmount program. So I just want to ask the ARC, I know it's outlined in some of the appendices, but if I just ask the South Arc some of the discussions that they had regarding moving the Westmount program, its challenges, perhaps some reaction that they may have received from the Westmount community.
The number one thing was it was fundamentally the argument as to whether obviously Westmount is outside the terms of reference for our ARC. However, in the terms of reference, as we interpreted them, which whether or not everyone was on the same page on that, our interpretation of the Westmount program, the program of choice, the self-directed, self-paced program is a program of choice. And as such, that program of choice was inside our terms of reference, even if the building was not. Therefore, the idea behind that is to centralize that self-paced program, makes it even more accessible and more centralized to our South Arc. As well, the spirit of what we were trying to do with the schools north of the link was to spread them out in such a way that there would be a school on the east side, be it Barton or Sherwood, and a school on the west side, be it McNabb or Hill Park. But then the Westmount program is that nice central location on the west-north side of the arc.
So Mr. Chair, what were some of the challenges that the South Arc discovered if that move were to happen in moving the Westmount program? What were the challenges is what I'm interested in.
Yeah. Obviously, moving 1,400 students from a self-paced program over to a new location is a huge undertaking. It was something that we had not intentionally looked at approaching at the beginning, but then when we realized that having a program, the self-paced, self-directed program centrally located in the mountain area might better serve more of the students that are traveling a greater distance to get to the Westmount program. It's sort of nestled away in one corner of the mountain. This gave them a better opportunity to arrive at that program from a variety of areas.
In addition, so that perhaps they get their opportunity to take advantage of this opportunity to do the board.
I do really like that suggestion. It's interesting. I have to admit I haven't looked into it very much, but certainly if the board did exactly what the ARC members suggested, which is to consult with the Westmount community and look at some of those options. So my follow-up question, my final question perhaps to the chair would be in terms of process, to understand at this point, how would that happen? Because as mentioned, Westmount's outside of the terms of reference. And as we saw just a bit earlier this evening with the King George ARC, we run into issues with trying to make decisions, and then we have these other recommendations that we have to make outside of the terms of reference, and it gets a bit confusing and convoluted. So to be specific, if we were to choose, Mr. Chair, option E, which is closure of Mountain, Sherwood, and Sir Allan McNabb, and from there we would move the Westmount program to Hill Park, how would we do that in one motion and one later in whether it's May or June? Because we wouldn't be able to, for instance, make the decision to move Westmount in that same night, from what I understand earlier this evening. So how would we package all of that together if we were to implement the ARC's concept E?
Director Malloy.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to reiterate what the committee says, that clearly we all know that Westmount is outside the terms of reference. It's also important to clarify, though, that the program itself is outside of an ARC process. In other words, as a system program, it would never be part of an ARC process, and that is important to clarify. So if the Board of Trustees wish to consider anything along these lines, a formal motion would need to be passed directing staff to conduct that formal consultation process, and it would only involve the Westmount community because it in essence is their impact. The challenge is, and this is important to keep in mind, that even if the trustees were to pass a formal motion that would direct staff to do this within the context that is the ARC for everything in relationship to the terms of reference, it wouldn't be part of the ARC. But you could not wait till after the fact because your ARC decision has to have an accommodation strategy. And as I understand what's been put before trustees for this recommendation is you can't create an accommodation strategy for a whole group of students after the ARC is finished. So to clarify, formal motion would need to be passed directing staff. It would need to be passed within the same time frame as the ARC process. But I need to clarify absolutely and clearly it is never a part of the ARC process. And again, it has nothing to do in this case with your terms of reference. It has to do with the notion of the guidelines put forward by the ministry and our policy around system programs, which is why, as the committee so articulately stated, it was suggested that it be part of an additional recommendation, excuse me, wrong choice of words, consideration, just like King George requested additional consideration to you, as you know, regarding transportation.
So that's a bit closer to the answer I'm looking for, but I really do want to understand, Mr. Chair, how we would implement some of these other options. So I'll keep using option E as an example. So let's move forward. It's May. We're now have to make a decision on this. If the board decided they wanted to implement the ARC's option E, would we then, I'll just use an example, would we then approve the closure of Mountain and Sherwood and not McNabb yet? We would leave that open, then conduct the Westmount review, and then come back, make a Westmount decision, and then close McNabb. Would it be in these several stages? How would it fit together? I just really need to understand that at this point in the process before we get there in May and realize that we've missed a timeline or something.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the clear and direct answer would be that if any consideration were to be desired by this Board of Trustees, a formal motion directing staff should happen relatively soon.
So if the board were interested in moving the Westmount program, and I'm not necessarily advocating that, I'm trying to just understand, because these are 3 of the 4 options that the ARC are asking us to consider, we would actually have to move the consideration of moving the Westmount program now in order to make a decision in May. So if we were to consider any of those 3 options the ARC just proposed to us, we need to do that now.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the only clarification that's important to note is in my own homework on this, because it falls outside of any ARC guideline, and because it flows outside of any ARC policy, what would be expected of the board is a process of consultation that's perceived as fair. There is nothing that states that that particular consultation needs to be 90, 60, or 30 days. It would be simply the decision of this board what an extensive consultation or an appropriate consultation would be. But clearly, that would be in your purview to decide, and that would need to be done at the same time as the ARC process is happening, only because those options clearly need an accommodation strategy for students you may be deciding to move. And therein lies why, like the King George circumstance, whereby you were able to wait till the end of the process and then deal with the consideration, that's why it would have to happen more within the same window. But again, I must state for the integrity of the process, and this is the 4th time I will state it, only so it's in every minute, because that could be challenging. This is completely outside of the ARC process, even if board were to pass a formal motion asking staff to do something within those timelines that you're operating under.
So my only concern, and I do understand what the director is saying, my only concern is, and like I said, I'm not advocating to move Westmount, but I do want to make sure that 3 of the 4 options are still on the table when we get to May. Because if we don't, then we're down to 1 option, which is technically just the staff option. So I'll ask perhaps the chair, would you entertain a motion this evening to consider the moving Westmount and enter into a consultation? Would you accept a motion this evening at this point? Because it seems like that's the only opportunity to make it.
I think we could.
And I don't want to hijack the whole conversation here, but that's 3 of the 4 options that are on the table. So I want to make sure those are alive and well when we actually get to May. So perhaps I'll move the motion. I'm not sure, but I'll maybe open it to some discussion. I'm not even sure if that's within the interest of the trustees. So I'll leave that for discussion. Perhaps if there's interest, we could move in that direction.
Okay, so you're not putting it on the table?
No, not yet, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Trustee, student trustee, oh, actually, I see Gary, right?
Kevin.
Sorry, just backwards.
I just want to reiterate, just so that it's not lost, without arguing anything with through you, Mr. Chair, without arguing of any of the points that have already been brought up, I think it's very important at this point, regardless of what direction your next motion and vote is going to go, that the switch of the Westmount program over to the Hill Park location was a request to enhance the option. Yeah. The options were not contingent upon that happening. I heard you had said earlier, Mr. White, that to make sure that we don't get down to just 1 option. I want to make it clear from my point of view that we wouldn't be down to 1 option. We would still have 4 on the table. That request would simply to be enhance those other 3 options.
I've got student trustee Judy Shen next.
Through Mr. Chair, just to clarify, in both the South and the North ARC reports, our committee reports, they did indicate that there was an interest for French Immersion High School, but in the staff system program strategy, it was for only 2. For French immersion to only be in 2 clusters, and 1 is already in Westdale. So I was just wondering if the staff had a recommendation of which cluster they would like to see the French immersion high school in.
All right, Director Malloy.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and the reason why the report is presented the way it is because that's the work that has to happen after this formal part of the process regarding facility takes place. One of the biggest concerns of our French immersion parents is that we have a viable secondary program. And we know that as part of the work we're doing with French immersion regarding where is their interest and what is it that we might need, it is at this point absolutely impossible to determine which would be the most effective site. And what staff has been saying since the beginning is we're open to 3. If there was actually the desire in our community for 3, we do not believe, frankly, that that is the case. And in order for us to determine which other cluster it would be in would be very dependent upon where most of the students are. And that's still part of the strategy that we're working on, separate from yet connected to this ARC process.
And another quick question. Looking at the numbers, when we add proceeds of disposition to the ministry, the amount that we would be asking the ministry for, I think all of the options, the total amount is greater than the amount needed to build a school. So I'm just wondering if we must sell all the land on which we possibly decide to close the schools on.
Dan.
Through you, Mr. Chair, in the construction of any business case of the Ministry of Education, we would seek full funding because the proceeds of disposition are something that we can always retain to do something else with. So our first choice would be looking for full funding for the projects, and then we would fall back on proceeds of disposition afterwards. And that's why we request full funding in every single option.
I guess through you, Mr. Chair, what I'm asking through that is if selling all of the land from every high school we decide to close is something that must happen, as in if there's any way back, if the projections do change, if there's a need for a new.
Dan, you got that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're just trying to decipher, make sure I answer the question properly. I think once we get to our concluding slide, where we can see how everything plays into the big picture, that might be a better opportunity to address that particular question, because it provides the overview of what this all means and what the long-term ramifications of not only the cost of the project, but the potential proceeds of disposition. So that might be a better opportunity to address that particular question.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to Gary, Ann, and Kevin for your presentation. And personally, I greatly appreciated being presented a lot of options because it gives us a lot to think about, and it looks at different utilizations, and it looks at different facility conditions that we can all consider. So I wanted to extend my thanks to the committee for giving us options, because I support that. When I was reading through this, and you can clarify this for me, when I looked at option B, D, and E, I really did not see them working without moving the Westmount program somewhere else, Hill Park, whatever. Unless, of course, and this came through in your presentation, your preferred site for the new school is the southeast mountain. But for me, if I'm looking at the map and I'm looking at option B, D, and E, and if we don't move the Westmount program, then would not the Jerome site be the preferred site? Because as soon as you close McNabb, you have left almost the West Mountain empty. So through you, Mr. Chair, clarification on the Jerome site not being suitable as soon as you close McNabb without moving Westmount. I know there's many portions to my statement there, but I'm sure they eat, sleep, and breathe what I'm talking about, so they can maybe respond to that.
Okay. Who wants to take that? Kevin?
One of the main issues, and I agree, eat, sleep, breathe. My fiance is almost ready to strangle me at this point.
Right.
Conversation. Yes, the Jerome site was a site that we found to be difficult based on south of the link. The majority of the growth continues to be, and probably will be, east on the east side. One of our representatives, Margaret Eagle, spent a lot of painstaking time breaking down every single feeder school in the South Arc, and all of those catchment areas run east-west and not north-south. I may be incorrect, but I believe there are only 3 schools that cross over the link in terms of where their catchment areas go. So in the spirit of keeping feeder school populations together, when they were then going on to the next step of high school, When we cranked out some of the catchment areas, they really did fall out east and west, at which point a school then would be, if we were going to use the idea that a school go in south of the link, it made the most sense with the most students on the east side to then break it down in the way that the maps fell out, at which point the Jerome site, as you saw, was right in the corner of that catchment area south of the link, with stuff like the reservoir off of Garth and the tons of farmland on the west hand side. It really, those were it sort of, to put it frankly, it just served the most needs the best way we could. There's no perfect option short of building a school for 100 kids in every 100 kid thing. That's just not feasible. So this was the best option we could come up with.
Okay, and just wondering about, as soon as you close McNabb in B, D, or E, were you considering a boundary review at all with Ancaster High? Through you, Mr. Chair.
This is a great time. We actually found our hands tied a great deal through this entire process, as I'm sure a lot of ARCs did, by the terms of reference. So it was very difficult for us to deal with anything that was going to encroach upon, for example, the proximity of Sherwood and Delta, to the proximity of McNabb and Ancaster. And so in terms of that was one of the main reasons we wanted to bring this many options to the table, which would allow you, the trustees, who can then look beyond the terms of reference and then as a system come up with the most viable option, be it whichever way you saw fit.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a couple of other quick questions, maybe more for staff on this one. Is a self-paced school a purpose-built school? Or can it fit in any composite high school?
I think, Director Moore?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Again, all of our programming, self-paced included, needs to be thought about in terms of what its specific needs are. In terms of self-paced, like virtual, like blended, like all other creative delivery models, I don't particularly, and I'm giving an opinion, see purpose-built spaces for that particular approach. Others might argue with me, based upon the fact that across the country, having had some experience with self-paced, self-directed programs, some could argue that self-paced, self-directed, and some of the walls that we have in those particular buildings wouldn't necessarily facilitate that kind of programming. Others would argue that that's not an issue. So to answer your question as directly as I can, I know there's different opinions on that, but I don't necessarily think that the self-paced, self-directed program needs purpose-built space to the same degree of some of our other programs, such as automotive, even though a program like Westmount also includes automotive. So that's why the question is a little bit challenging, because we offer that in a self-paced, self-directed way, and that needs a purpose-built space.
Okay, also, do we offer peer mentoring credits at Mountain?
That would be Superintendent Joshua, I believe.
I don't believe we specifically offer a peer mentoring credit program at Mountain.
Okay, so that's interesting. Why not?
Joshua.
Sorry? So, my apologies. I think the principal can answer that probably more directly, and certainly if the student interest is there, we could, and the need is there, we could offer that. But okay. I'm sorry about that. So,
okay.
So that type of program is provided.
Available to students?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Also, I guess, I've seen it now in the two ARCs where facilities management is to address the renewal needs for the program strategy at the remaining schools. I'm not sure how facilities management can really do that, considering that really those monies come from the ministry. It's really something that needs to be addressed at the ministry level, that we have such a deficit in our renewal needs. We can certainly fix the boiler and fix a window and replace roofs based on priority, but actual renewal needs based on a program strategy and the deficits that we have, I don't really think are a facilities management role. It's more that we need to speak to the ministry about this. So I need clarification on what does that look like, that recommendation.
Who's on with Associate Director?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I'll answer it very generally to say that we're starting with 18 high schools, and we are presently trying to address the school renewal needs and the capital and the maintenance needs of 18 high schools right now. Subject to the final decisions of the Board of Trustees, should the staff recommendations happen to be accepted, that would see the removal of 7 of those 18 schools and the addition of 2 new schools and significant improvements to one of the remaining schools that we'll speak about in the West. So we go from taking those school renewal dollars and spreading them over 18 schools to taking the school renewal dollars and spreading them over 11 schools, presuming the 2 brand new ones don't have school renewal needs. So it allows us to use that amount of money more effectively over a fewer number of schools.
Okay, I'm just stating that the needs are significant. And I mean, we have to go through this process for sure. But I understand the math, of course, that we have the same amount of dollars over less schools, but it's still not enough, I guess is my point. That's it for me right now. Thanks.
Trustee Powell.
Thank you. Again, like the North Arc, and looking at the enrollment numbers overall, in looking at the October 31st, most recent ones, we're looking at about 6,500 students in round numbers that we're trying to accommodate across all schools, including the self-paced program that happens to be located in the Westmount building. I look also at the enrollment for elementary and find that we're down 3% in the South Elementary. We're down 319 kids. This all comes from the staff report. So when I look at the fact that the enrollment for elementary is declining, it's not in the lower city and it's not in the west, but it certainly is on the mountain. And I look at the fact that we need 6,500 spots. To me, that's why it makes sense to me, listening to the South Arc, why they're saying you need 4 schools. And just as a reminder to my colleagues, the self-paced program is taking 82% of mountain kids. So if you just think of it for a minute as one of 4 schools, they're each taking 1,500 each. It's an easy math. 6,000 kids, thereabouts, 4 schools, 1,500 each. So just to kind of applaud the South Arc Committee, the 3 reps and the rest in the back, they wrestled with a lot of issues that their hands were really tied with. The land, and I printed it in color for myself, but when you look at the Jerome site and you look at the boundary suggestions, you know, if Sherwood's in the wrong place because it's in a corner, so too is Jerome. I mean, it becomes blatantly obvious as soon as you look at it in a colored map. Why would you put a brand new school in the corner of a boundary area? It doesn't make sense. And because they know that Binbrook's growing, we just moved French immersion, what are we going to do in order to locate it properly? So when you look at it, you say you need 4 schools. You know, when I look at the enrollment numbers, the questions that I want to make sure are clarified, not so much for me, but for the rest of you as you come to your decision making, is to understand that simple math. 6,000 kids, you need 4 schools. Have we really got the right things in the right places? So if the land's not in the right place, maybe we should be sending staff forth to go solve that problem now. If the program for self-paced isn't necessarily in the right place, similarly, maybe we should be going and sending staff forth to solve that problem now. And until those two problems are actually kind of wrestled to the ground, it's really hard to make a decision about closure. You know, someone recently said to me, and I just keep waking up with this thought. It's like, you don't want to go on a choose your own adventure path. You know, don't we want to own this? Don't we want to control the agenda? Don't we want to really, really look at our resources and use them to the best of our ability? I mean, you know, the messages keep coming down from the province to us that we've only got, and Director Malloy said himself, finite resources. So, you know, I just want to encourage you and applaud the committee. They struggled for a reason. They didn't struggle because they tried to make it hard for you. They struggled because the land isn't in the right place. They're struggling because they're convinced that the program, self-paced, is not in the right place. The building's under a huge overhaul. It'll make a great school no matter what you put in it. It used to be a composite school. So when you ask clarifying questions of the committee, you know, just really think about the facts that they're trying to share with you, and they're really trying to hit a home run with you to understand before you choose an adventure and then this domino affects that domino. You really need two solid facts. What's the ideal location for the land? What's the ideal location for the program? Put everything else aside, just ask yourself those two basic questions, and then you can go from there. So, you know, I was going to ask staff why they didn't put the Jerome site on their map, but I know they did on the slide deck, but we didn't get the slide deck. So I've drawn it on my own map. It's absolutely in a corner. You know, I don't know how our student stakeholders and parents are going to feel about us, you know, building a school they could probably throw a ball at and not be allowed to go to unless they're, you know, approved on and out of catchment. So, you know, I don't understand why, you know, why staff maybe isn't coming up with a more phased approach as well that says, you know we have a land problem, let's go figure that out. So why? Why isn't staff kind of seeing maybe what the committee saw, that there's a couple of serious problems that need to be wrestled to the ground first before we make final decisions that could last for decades on which schools are open? Why not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll begin to respond and pass it over to Mr. Del Bianco. We're solidly in favor of the staff recommendation, as you might imagine. It does provide for a distribution of secondary schools across the mountain, somewhat, I'll say, evenly, with Barton to the east, either Hill Park or the new school in the center, and Sarah McNabb to the west. We're not in favor of the relocation of the Westmount program. We don't have an issue with it being there. I think Mr. DeVoe identified that the relocation of 1,400 students is no small undertaking, and we're satisfied with the Jerome property. We own the Jerome property. It's a 28-acre site. It meets the size requirements that we're looking for, and it is centrally located. Recognize the trustees' comment about it being somewhat in the corner of a proposed catchment area. The advantages to the property with respect to its location in the center of the mountain and the fact that we own it, we believe outweigh any challenges that might be presented by having it in the corner of a potential catchment area. And Mr. Del Bianco does not wish to add anything, so that's the staff response.
So I hear the staff response, but what I didn't hear was strategic. I did not hear strategic. I heard cost of land, we own it, 1,400 kids, hard to move. Well, you know what? There's 1,400 kids in Sherwood, but you're proposing to move them. So there's another 1,000 kids in Hill Park, but we're proposing to move them. So again, I'm going to go back to my simplistic thing that says 4 schools, 6,000 kids, divided by 4, give or take. Choose strategically the right location for the program, the right location for the land, and solve those, and then the rest of it will fall into place like dominoes. And it'll make perfect sense to everyone. You won't have to sell the stakeholders because they'll agree to it, because they'll know that you looked at it strategically. This is not a strategic plan to me. I needed to hear that from staff. I look at it, it doesn't make sense to me, and I haven't heard anything that's helping me with it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I certainly respect that any of the trustees might not respect our strategy, but I will put before you that the work that we have done is strategic from our perspective. We're very much willing to have you disagree with us. The work of the last year from our perspective is attempting to get at what we believe is the best option, and we bring it to you. So if you don't wish it, by all means, we will support anything that you need to make the best decision possible.
Okay, so I'll wrap up my clarification with just again a reminder to my peers. We've just built a brand new school in Binbrook. There's 600 kids needing a high school on the South Mountain. They need it close to where they are. They don't need it down at the Lincoln Upper James. So, you know, that's not a strategic location from that point of view with French immersion growing and all that growth that's happening up there.
Trustee Orr.
Thank you very much, sir. Through the chair, I would just like to, I know it's been stated and I apologize for stating it, but when the terms of reference mention program through the chair to the director, pardon me, and Westmount was off the radar. It wasn't stated that the program at Westmount as well is off the radar. It just said Westmount, the building, that's what some of us thought, and then the program. But no, I don't need an answer for that, but I'd just like to say that we read, and I don't know if all of us read programming correctly. It looks like it was a generic mistake there. Because if the director meant self-paced program is off the radar, it should have been stated in the terms of reference, which it was not, just the building. I just want to ask another question, though, for clarification. It's been mentioned twice around the table, the 1,400 relocation from Westmount to, say, Hill Park or wherever. 1,400 kids, half of them live in the central east area. So if you were to say, what is the current membership of Hill Park that live in the, Westmount, that live in the Westmount area, my question is, what would you say the answer is to that through the director? I mean, through the chair.
Dan, you got those numbers?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the percentages are accurate in that as of October of this past year, 2010, 82% of the population of the Westmount community resides within the South Cluster. So that is an absolute, it's a fact, yes. Based on...
My question was, I know that.
Yes.
My question was, okay, in the Westmount catchment, I know it's a system program. If that was a regular high school, you know, what would be the numbers there? Because I had difficulty with you saying 1,500 have to be relocated when they're in the Hill Park, Sherwood area. So my question is, how many students would be then at Westmount if you would do it by geographic resident living? Now, if you can't say...
we don't want to get into a debate situation here today. We're
want
supposed to just be getting
questions
clarification.
through the
So,
chair.
Dan, let's hear what you got.
I would assume, my assumption would be that if you were to move the program, the students currently enrolled at one would be the students currently enrolled at the other. If they're there for the program, they're...
That's skirting around, but I'll leave it. I think we don't have the number, and that would have been the correct answer. And that's what I would have appreciated. The other thing that came to my head as the learned members of the South Arc, and you deserve to be called that because you work so hard, is that when we mention McNabb and Ancaster, well, no, we can discuss Ancaster because it's not the membership of the South Arc. Well, as trustees, we look at the system. Now, my question is, when we look at closures, do we not look at, we could take a school from this South Arc and take one from West Arc?
Sorry, Trustee Orban, I hate to jump in, but what we're supposed to be answering...
I know, but my question is, what about the, when we as the trustees, because the South Arc...
At the end, Associate Director Ben and Dan are going to give us a big system picture report. And at that time, if that question is appropriate, we'll take it down. Because you're asking a question that is not a clarification of the reports tonight. You're asking a question of what we do in the big, and they're going to do that at the end, I believe.
That's correct, and if I just may make a side remark, and I apologize for it, because the South Arc asked the question, what would happen if we could work with both McNabb and Ancaster? And that's the answer was, it's not in your terms of reference as the South Arc.
Okay.
But it should be in our terms of reference as the South Arc. Now having said that, I would just like to state that the other question is, with regard to the school closures and the 4 options given to us by the South Arc, the program issue of self-paced doesn't have to enter it. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Okay, the 3 options had self-paced as the program that would be part of those options. What I'm saying, does it have to be part of the options program issue?
Okay, so I think that's, yeah.
Absolutely not, Ms. Orban. It was simply to enhance those 3 options. Otherwise, the options could, although some arguably more than others would be better suited, they may not stand on their own, but no, it's not in the option that would have to happen.
Okay, thank you, because to me, it's important if we maintain the integrity of the Westmount program with self-paced. That doesn't mean that we'll have to close Hill Park or McNabb, etc. We could still look at it as a program issue minus the self-paced program.
Trustee Brennan.
Yes, I wanted to go back a little earlier to when we were talking about class sizes and how utilization rates were being analyzed. And I believe it was Ms. Pollard who, and I was kind of intrigued by the philosophy of it, was talking about, I believe, and I hope my memory is good enough for this, that individuals with some special needs should not be in large cat sizes. There are classrooms of 21, but rather, I believe the number was 12. I just first want a clarification. My memory is working at this late time of the night.
And?
So I just want to start with a few comments, and then I'd like to pass it over to Dan, because he's the numbers guy, which I really appreciated his work with numbers over the past year. What was my purpose in bringing this whole thing up in the first place in the ARC was to make it very, very clear that our students at Mountain cannot be warehoused, for lack of a better word, right now in the same manner as students without intellectual, academic, and emotional needs.
Okay, so I just want to be, my apologies, I just want to be clear that it was a 21 class size cap versus another philosophy which would say 12 for students with some specialized needs. Is that correct? Is that how I heard that?
So, yes.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. So with that in mind though, I'm wondering if I could get from some of the staff, perhaps Superintendent of Special Education, just an understanding of what the ministry calculus is or matrix is around a number of students in a class with specialized needs, resource teachers who are needed, and that sort of thing. I just want to have I am intrigued by the 12-person classroom, but I just want to see what the formula is.
Superintendent Corcoran, welcome back to the
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair. The ministry does in Regulation 298, Section 30, talk about when the board has designated special education classes and the numbers depending on the specific disability of the students within that program. So in that regulation, it does talk about classes, for example, for autism would be 6, for behavior is 8, for other ones of mixed ability, 16. It does have those kinds of numbers in that regulation. It's my understanding that in Parkview, for example, we do have a comprehensive class in our board. Our comprehensive classes are to 12. And in the majority of classes in both Mountain and Parkview, are staffed according to locally developed courses, which is a max of 17. Okay.
So I guess I'm now asking about the number 21 versus 12, and maybe that's best asked.
That's Dan this time.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, just to provide some background on that particular slide, there was a lot of challenge in our discussions regarding the utilization of the mountain facility. The ministry recognizes those classrooms as full-on classrooms and therefore loads them at 21. And that's how, when you add it all together, we get the capacity of 525, which is on record at the Ministry of Education for the mountain facility. The challenge we had is the spaces aren't being used for 21, so how do we illustrate it or try to analyze it in a different way? And it's really just that. It's intended to be just for more illustrative purposes only, in that we can't change the loading of that class because of the size of those particular classrooms, and as a result of the size, they're loaded at 21 and not 12. But for our own analysis around the table here as a South Arc committee, that's where the genesis of this loading came from. So in the eyes of the ministry and for the purposes of utilization analysis, the classes are loaded at 21 versus what Ann was mentioning earlier on, in that they don't actually have 21 students in there. So what would it actually, functional utilization versus actual utilization, I think is probably the best way to describe the difference between those two numbers.
And Mr. Chair, I appreciate that explanation. It does beg me to ask another question though. And that is, what utilization rate then are we bound by in our analysis? Because it is compelling to me that when you factor in various other ministry guidelines on the different specialized needs, that you're not dealing with 21. Now, I may have misunderstood, and I apologize for misunderstanding, but I'm just now, my main question is, what utilization rate do we as Board of Trustees need to be looking at when we look at these various scenarios for the South Arc?
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, in the eyes of the ministry, it is the utilization rate and the OTGs on record at the ministry. Which is...
Clarification, that's the 21 number?
Yes, I'm sorry, yes.
If I may make a comment without, any deep analysis, that just seems nonsensical to me, if I may. I am compelled by some of the commentary that the South Arc presenters have made on that issue. Thank you.
Okay, I got Trustee Johnstone next.
Thank you. Through the chair, to the committee members, I also want to thank you for all your hard work. It is certainly appreciated. I know that you and the rest of your committee put a lot of hours into this and certainly did your best to represent all the communities up on the mountain. My question primarily goes to staff. My first question is I noticed for Sir Alan McNabb that the numbers for the staff recommendation jump from utilization rate of projected to be 61 next year, or currently, to 52% by 2020, and then for the final, so if it remained at its current status quo, to 90% versus 72% with the staff recommendation. I just want clarifications. Would that be due to a boundary review, or why does the McNabb numbers jump up so drastically? Thank you.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. Sir Alan McNabb is a large facility, and in order to increase the utilization in the long term, the boundary would have to be expanded eastward. So, and that's a result of that proposed boundary change for Sir Alan McNabb.
Thank you. I just wanted to understand, because it wasn't mentioned, no changes were exactly mentioned for Alan McNabb. So my other question is too, you still end up at 72% utilization by 2020, even with the boundary review. Why was there no, or was there, sorry, any consideration to right size the school? And if not, why?
Dan, you want to take that one?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, I won't speak on behalf of the committee. It wasn't an option we actually explored in right sizing. Sir Alan McNabb, on the staff side of it, we've looked at increasing the boundary and not necessarily looking at right sizing the facility. No.
Sorry. And why was that? Why wasn't it considered? Is it that I saw that the repairs were only 20% compared to other buildings across this city. That's certainly reasonable, but I'm just wondering why right sizing wasn't considered at any point.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Sir Alan McNabb as a standalone facility is in fairly good condition. To tear down any portion of that building just to right size it, you'd be tearing down a fairly useful, functional facility. So I don't think it's a viable option in that direction.
Thank you.
See, Trustee Rowe.
One more question. I'm going to ask about the good places to learn monies, millions of dollars this board has poured into renovating and refurbishing schools. And the one comes to mind is my school, Hill Park. In 2003, we refurbished the auditorium, so now it's a theater auditorium. And the ministry said, I'll give you those monies, those tax dollars, if you leave your school open the minimum of 10 years. So 2003 at 10, or no, 2008 at 10 would be you can't close it until 2018. I would like an opinion of that through the chair to the director, and I would like the opinion to reflect on a ministry, and would we have to go back to the ministry and say, hey, wait a minute, although you poured all those dollars, we're going to, okay, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we actually asked this question of our ministry colleagues when we visited a few months back. And what they have always said is, and I think we would all agree, that responsible use of dollars is absolutely paramount, and that whenever we're trying to make decisions about how to use those capital renewal dollars, called in that case good places to learn, we use the best information that we have, and we do our best to try to utilize those dollars in a way that will remain. Having said that, they also said to us that they understand that new issues do emerge. Those issues don't always take on a 10-year lifespan, and that where there is clearly a rationale provided with a very clear business case attached, which is changing what may have been the decision made previously, they would never want us to be in any way reckless with those dollars, which I don't think we would, but they would understand if different decisions needed to come forward. And we did just ask that of them about 6 months ago. So the answer is they would like for us to be responsible, which we are. They would like for us to be as strategic in our planning as possible, but they also understand that sometimes issues emerge and new realities emerge, such as what's going on in this room, whereby we're dealing with probably one of the largest ARC processes that I think the province has ever known. New insights can then inform new decisions.
Thank you, but at the same time, theater auditoriums are not funded by the ministry. And we, by closing Hill Park, you close the theater auditorium, and the new facility, unless you do get our own monies to subsidize a theater auditorium, we don't have it unless we go to the watered down concept. So what we're really doing is looking at a school. Thank you. I know, but I know, I appreciate that, and I also like to say that all of us try to do our passion and do our very best, but it really bothers me through the chair that we don't abide by the rules, or the rules change so quickly.
Thank you. Okay, Trustee Glenn.
Missed a question earlier. I just want to make sure I've understood this properly. In every recommendation from the committee as well as from staff, I note that the students in the Billy Green area of Upper Stony Creek are all moving west in every single scenario. Is that accurate? Have I understood this properly?
Dan? Through you, Mr. Chair, yes.
So before we finish with this piece, I will have a related motion that I'd like to bring up around ARC and that observation, that fact, and some things that have happened recently. It's related to ARC to stabilize things, so I think it's important we bring it up tonight.
Okay, I have no other speakers, so I need somebody to move the motion, and I'm going to take the liberty with the trustees' permission to already amend this.
Yes.
So the trustees received the accommodation review reports, Ray Barton, Hill Park, Mountain Secondary, Sherwood, and Sir Allen McNabb Secondary, and defer a final decision until no earlier than May 2012. It's the same one as earlier, already amended. Who's willing to move that? Trustee Bishop, secondary, Trustee Johnston. All in favor of the recommended action? That is unanimous. For those in the room, Trustee Student Janice is absent from the room. Trustee Bell.
So on a related motion to the South Arc, I just want to put out some information, and then I will have a motion that goes with it. Or do you want me to do the motion first?
Motion first. Motion
first, and then I get to speak to it immediately? Okay, good. The motion is that and I might not get this part right, so I might need some help, that the Saltfleet Secondary School, currently over capacity at 125%, remain closed to out-of-catchment students to be reviewed as part of the transition period when we're implementing the ARCs. So I'll try it again. That the Saltfleet Secondary School, currently over capacity at 125%, remain closed to out-of-catchment students, this to be reviewed as part of the transition period for ARCs.
Need a second for any discussion?
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so as I said, the Saltfleet area right now, per all the school profiles that we have, is 125, maybe 128% over.
Point of order, how does this relate to the committee reports that we're just receiving?
Let me finish, you'll find out.
Let's let her finish.
All right.
Then we'll make a decision.
Because the school isn't even within
I understand. That's why I want to hear what she says.
Okay, so let me put a different fact first so we don't have someone jumping in and not understand. Billy Green is a feeder school to Sherwood, which is part of the ARC. So it is in the context of the ARC. We're trying to stabilize things, putting students first. I think that's what we're all here for, students first. So we're trying to stabilize things while we do a major transformation that is going to move thousands of kids around this system. So instead of doing things, as you've heard from the South Arc already, and moving them twice, staff themselves have said they don't want to move kids more than once. I'm finding the same thing at a lower level, at an individual school level, and I'm looking for supportive peers to stabilize this. So going back to starting with the fact that the Billy Green School is a feeder school to Sherwood, has been for years, continues to be, according to the clarification question that I asked in every single scenario before us. Four scenarios from the committee, one scenario from staff still moves those kids as a feeder school into some school east of it. It does not move those kids back to Saltfleet, ever, in any of these recommendations. So given that it is at 125 to 128% over capacity, and it is a feeder school to some school to the east of it, not to Saltfleet, for that, that's one of my reasons for asking you to support this motion. Secondly, there was no consultation with the parent community. There was no consultation with the current grade 9s, grade 10s, and grade 11s that are currently attending Sherwood. They were unaware that the council at the elementary school itself was looking for that change. There was no effort to communicate with them. There was no communication between the trustees. There was no communication from the principal of Sherwood to the trustee for that school, so that everyone was caught unawares that this was even happening. There was a, the students themselves will not receive transportation. The school board covers and pays for transportation to go into that Billy Green neighborhood to move all those kids. And you just looked at the map, you can see it. They're all moving them west. They're not moving them anywhere near going to Saltfleet. So we're going to take a cohort of kids, if they wish to apply, to go to an overcrowded school and actually not give them any busing. So I'm not seeing how that's in the students' best interest. The ARC itself is a transformational change, and the out of catchment, even though it's not a boundary change, the out of catchment is a little bit of what can be seen as a technical loophole that allows change to happen in a period of time when we said we would stabilize things. So I have a bit of a concern about that as well. In trying to stabilize this, I think that's our job, is to try to stabilize the system as we go through this major transformational change. And I also would be concerned that by allowing this to happen, and I have one clarification question of staff, by allowing this to happen, we might be, as has been said in other documents around this whole process, opening ourselves up to a possibility of an appeal, because it will be viewed as a technical loophole that we've actually changed a boundary and started to destabilize a very stable secondary school by taking away its feeder school in the middle of an ARC process. So for that reason alone, I think it is a very strong reason that we should not be doing this. And sorry, I thought I had one more. Oh yes, the question then to the question to staff is, could I please understand that the decision recently made by staff, which I understand is in their purview, but I think in this instance, because of the sensitivity of what's going on, we need to perhaps step in if you're willing to support the motion and stabilize. Right now, having opened up catchment to the Salt Fleet School from the Billy Green kids, does that mean that that is grade 9 students only, or does that mean that that's grade 10 can go back to Salt Fleet, grade 11 can go back to Salt Fleet, grade 12 can go back to Salt Fleet? What exactly does it mean when you say that you are going to open up the out of catchment application process for the Billy Green feeder school? Is that only 9, or is it all 4 years?
Associate Director Bain.
Through you, Mr. Chair. When a school is identified as open to out of catchment, it's open to all grades and all schools in the district. If I could comment on one of the trustees' comments.
I think I still have the floor. I asked for a question to be clarified. That's all I asked for. Otherwise, I think we're getting into a debate, and I think that's our domain. If someone else wants to ask staff a question, I think Trustee Orban and I have had this recent conversation. It's a congruence of ethics. It's our debate. Question of clarification was asked and answered.
Okay, carry on.
Thank you. So that being the case, that just reaffirms my worry for us about appeal. That reaffirms the risk that if you have 30 to 40 kids who are possibly being able to enter Salt Fleet instead of Sherwood at grade 9, now you do that times 4. Now you've got 150 to 180 kids that are going to be removed from a process of a school that could be considered for closure, and you're going to instead put them into a school, inviting them in to apply with no bus when that school is already at approaching 130% over capacity. For all those reasons, I ask you as my peers to support stabilizing this situation now and do not allow a change in the status, because it was a change. This school was closed to out of catchment a year ago. Its population has actually gone up by 26 students since that decision was made to close it. Now granted, 2 years before that it was a little higher. It was hovering around the 1230, 1240 mark. But if you've chosen to close it to catchment and you've chosen to keep it out of the ARC, why now would you open it up and remove, possibly by parent choice, remove kids from a school that could be closed, don't give them transportation, and put them into an overcrowded facility? For all those reasons, I ask for your support on this motion.
Trustee White?
Just a quick question, hopefully a quick response as well. The question I have in terms of Mr. Chair, the question I have in terms of the change, moving the Billy Green students over to Salt Fleet or feeding into Salt Fleet, that would cause a boundary change for Salt Fleet. Do I understand that?
Director Bain. I'll do that. Okay, Director Moore, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to clarify, there's no boundary change. And that's why there's no transportation. And many of our schools who have space, whether they are in an ARC or not, there's a process that's followed for them to go if a parent wishes for them to go. In this particular case, there are 49 spaces open at Salt Fleet, and that is it. And it's not where there is any boundary changes or any other decisions being made. If somebody wants to drive from another place in the district to put their name in at Saltfleet, we're saying that there's 49 spots at this point, and that's based upon the number of portables that are presently there and the accommodation that it presently can take.
Any other questions or comments?
Question.
Trustee Bell.
Could staff please advise the Board of Trustees how many portables are already on the Saltfleet site and what its on-the-ground capacity is compared to its student numbers right now?
Manager Worling, I see, appearing.
There are currently 12 portables on Saltfleet.
How many?
12.
12. On-the-ground capacity and number of students.
Director Moore.
Through you, Mr. Chair, again to provide staff's perspective. When we have accommodation, and in this case 12 portables, and we have this all through the district, and many of you have asked us to ensure that if we have spaces in our schools that we provide access to our families. If we're not planning to move the 12 portables, which we're not, that allows us to accommodate a certain number of students. And therein is where the 49 students came from. Because we're keeping the accommodation as is, and we have opened that school, and most of our schools, except for 3 or 4 secondary schools, have space. So the one thing we cannot control, and it will not be a part of any kind of appeal, is if our parents wish to go from one school to another school where there is space, under our guideline, they have the right to ask.
Trustee Churchill.
I guess I'm trying to understand the on-the-ground capacity and the out-of-catchment, because we've certainly had it out-of-catchment capped, no can do at Waterdown High because it was portable city. And even though some of the population dipped down before the expansion project, was still no, you cannot go to Waterdown District High School because it was portable city. And we are only now able to say you can come to Waterdown District High School because there's going to be a 763 pupil place addition open to students in September or October or November. So why the different scenarios for the 2 different schools?
Manager Worling.
Through you, Chair. Waterdown, you're correct, is opening as of this September. The addition is scheduled to be completed. Waterdown, I believe, has 19 portables on site compared to the 12 at Saltfleet. What we have seen with Saltfleet, while the enrollment is slightly higher than it was last year, it is already 30 students. Its enrollment that it reached this year is 30 students below what we anticipated. It also is projected to drop another 55 students next year. And the additional concern would be the opening of Bishop Bryan, the new Bishop Bryan in the Catholic system, not too far from the Saltfleet School. So those conditions, and the drop, the most significant being the drop of enrollment that we are anticipating at Saltfleet, leads us to believe we have the space with those 12 portables to accommodate the students.
I don't like the message that this sends at all. About out of catchment and pupil spaces, and because I've had parents begging me to go to Waterdown District High School, and they were not allowed to go because it was portable city and that we did not have the space, even though the population was actually decreasing. It's about to explode again because of the OMB opening up the floodgates. But this is a double standard, and I will support this motion.
Trustee Simmons.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, are we forcing anyone to go to change their school from Billy Green to Saltfleet? I would say, that's rhetorical, no. If parents want their kids, if they want to have the freedom, and we're going to be able to give them the freedom to go to the school of their choice, why wouldn't we do that? You know, just because you have a different situation in a different part of the city, and you can always look at those after the fact, why do we have to go to the lowest common denominator? Let's allow these students to go to the school of their choice. If we have room, let them go.
Student Trustee Shannon.
Through Mr. Chair, further to what Trustee Simmons said, this door for opportunity is still open. For the board, a few years might not be a lot, but for a student's high school career, even leaving the door open for like 2 or 3 years can mean the difference between the future of a student. Because if Solfleet offers these programs and opportunities that students cannot find at another school, then we should leave the door open to pursue these opportunities. And if there is space, as mentioned, we should.
Trustee Bishop.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that, first of all, I have some questions. That's all I have, really. If I can ask through you to the superintendent of schools, I believe that do we provide transportation in the form of buses or in the form of bus tickets for Billy Green to go to Sherwood currently?
Superintendent figure out.
Through you, Chair. Currently, no, we do not provide bus tickets for transportation.
You provide direct busing?
No, we.
To Sherwood?
I'm sorry. To Sherwood, we do. I'm sorry.
You provide.
Just direct busing. There's two buses that go into the Billy Green area that provide direct busing to Sherwood Secondary School.
But I believe there is a problem of access that I've been under. That is there not for the Billy Green students to get to Sherwood? No, have I got this wrong? I thought there was a because parents who talked to me when I was chair indicated a problem of something about the bus routes have changed, and I passed this all on to the. Probably I'm talking about. But you know what? This is all just wasting time. We have a West Arc waiting, so I'll just stop talking. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Trustee White.
So just one final quick question. Just
no, my comments were a waste of time. In case anyone is thinking.
In terms of Solfleet, if there's 12 portables on site and we have extra spaces, I mean, I sort of agree with Trustee Simmons in that let's not go to the lowest common denominator. It's a great argument. But on the other hand, if we have 12 portables on site and there's empty space, why are we not removing portables from that site and saving money versus assuming that we have open spots? Like, wouldn't we want to save the money so we actually would?
Social good demand.
Through you, Mr. Chair, right now through the ARC process, we are trying to understand what our inventory of schools and seats is. The longer term accommodation strategy that you will see likely in the facilities master plan would be the reduction on the reliance of portables. But step one, as far as staff is concerned, is to rationalize the number of buildings and seats that we have, and then we can undertake further rationalization strategies.
Trustee Orban.
Just a question. We deferred the decision with regard to South Arc recommendation. Now, Sherwood is still on one of those options, be it not to close. So why are we already making additions ahead of time about the Billy Green group when we haven't decided? Okay, that's my
through you, Mr. Chair. Very briefly, the whole out of catchment process is one that we've been working on for the last year. There are lots of different issues surrounding that. There's a lot of different myths surrounding that. And there's a lot of different beliefs regarding what has been the basis for various decisions. I can only speak for the last short while, and we're working through that. So clearly, it's not in any way a direct response to any school in the ARC. It simply means that each year, staff works through a process to determine what a particular school can accommodate. That particular school may have portables, and we still say that that school can accommodate more students unless there's some plan to remove those portables. Our planning department assists senior staff to realize how you can or when you can move a portable off. In other words, that the enrollment has gone to such a place that you can remove it. So in this particular instance, in response to a community that went to its superintendent and said, please change the boundary, staff said, no, we will not change the boundary. Please give us transportation. Staff said, no, we will not give you transportation. Please let us in, and we did the numbers and said 49 students from anywhere can go, not just Billy Green students who happen to be scheduled for Sherwood. Students could go to Barton. There's hundreds of spaces. Students could go to Hill Park. There's hundreds of spaces. Right now, we have no history of saying no to that. We have history of saying no where there are certain numbers of portables, but my understanding from our planning department is there's other reasons why that no may come. And now in a case like Waterdown, the door will be opening because different situations emerge. Optically, I understand the concern. I'm simply putting on the table that when approached by parents, like we are all through this district, we tried to be as consistent as possible with our response.
Trustee Orr.
I have to respond. I've been getting calls in my community that say, Lillian, you know, we're not sure what schools are going to be closed, so therefore we'll all go to Westmount because that's the stable school. Well, this is the same case here with probably with the Billy Green. They're not worried about Sherwood being closed, so hey, let's go to the new school that's already there. It makes sense.
We've got a lot of people.
Rhetorical
one more
question.
speaker, then we got the West Arc waiting, and then we'll make it. Trustee Petal, 1 minute, please.
Could the director please describe the standard communication protocol that goes with that? Because I'm rather concerned about the fact that I knew nothing about this until it was raised by a parent. So is there a learning, let me finish it please, before you get all, is there a learning out of this that there was a communication gap? Because I don't think, in light of the arcs that are going on, that the way for the trustee for the local school that receives these kids should have found out this way. Is there a learning that is going to come out? I still would like the motion supported. I would like trustee intervention to stabilize the situation. But is there a gap here? Is there a lesson learned?
Through you, Mr. Chair, across the district right now, there are students moving to other schools. Normally, we do not give you a running list of those particular schools. Staff in no way intended to disrespect any single trustee. It's just not our normal practice to let trustees know when right now we have students moving to different places. If that is the will of the trustees, that through some communication that be provided, we are certainly open to that. But clearly, what we wish to state is we have not usually communicated to you 18 high schools and all the students who are moving out of catchment as we speak.
So I need to interrupt. The question was about out of catchment. When you change the status, I didn't ask for every student's movement. I asked for when you change a decision and we knew going into the ARCs that we had a closed status, that we had an exemption from the ARC, when you change that status to open, is there a communication protocol?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the plan in place is that every January going forward, not single to one school or one ward, but all schools, 115, you will have the open or closed catchment each January 1st.
Thank you. Motion on the floor is for South Secondary School to remain closed out of catchment. Thank you. Calling the question. There's no other speakers. All in favor of calling the question? Thank you. That's unanimous. All in favor of the motion? Trustee Petal, Trustee Terpstra. All opposed? Trustee Brennan, Trustee Johnston, Trustee Hicks, Trustee Maholan, Trustee Simmons, Trustee Barlow, Trustee Bishop, Student Trustee Janis, Student Trustee Shen. Those abstaining, Trustee White, Trustee Orman. Thank you. 2-minute break while we get the West Arc.